Thanks, Isabel, for coming out and giving this talk. So I definitely disagree with you, but I have a quick comment and then I have a question.
Okay.
So the first comment I have is you gave, like, in my view, a really cynical answer about what liberals kind of want in terms of why they're pushing this pro-abortion policy. And I kind of want to speak in terms of maybe the body politic. What I sense is going on is that over the years, especially as it pertains to like women's rights, we've seen like social conservatism historically being coupled towards like, regressive gender norms and opinions, such as like, women don't deserve the right to vote. Some inflammatory passages in the Bible, like in 1 Timothy, about women shouldn't be priests in church and so forth. And so basically, I feel that at least amongst like your common liberal, I don't think there's like this grand like authoritarian wet dream that you're implicating or so forth.
I actually would agree with you on that.
Okay,
But
I'm glad. Okay, that heals my soul a little bit. Yeah, there might be some more like sinister, motives people that are more, higher ranking and so forth. So that was just my one comment.
Okay.
The second, my question is though, so if you look at like the distribution of the frequency of abortion based off like the week post-conception, if you look in the United States or United Kingdom, depending on the data set, you'll see that the most common week would be like the 6th or the 7th week, for example. And although I definitely agree with you about like the clump of cells characterization being definitely for like a 35-week fetus, that is like pretty much an absurd characterization. It's true in a really like low resolution sense, but there's other things going on in that clump. Like you could say like I'm a clump of cells, you're a clump of cells, but there's other things involved there. But when it comes to like a 6 or 7 week embryo, I would want to know in your view like why does that have value from, let's ignore the maybe the Christian perspective and talk more from maybe a secular perspective.
Love
Because
that.
I see an entity with no consciousness. There's no connection between the thalamus and the sensory organs and so forth.
I first want to respond to your comment because I actually agree with you, and that's kind of what I was saying, that 90% of voters under 45 across all of the body politic are looking at the radical propositions of the Democrat Party today on abortion and saying, no, we're morally uncomfortable with that. That's not what represents 90% of the United States of America, and we hope that you can hear us on that. So I actually would agree. I think the average liberal today, not just on this issue, but basically every issue of our time, is not appropriately represented by the Democrat Party that has, at the highest levels and echelons of the party, embraced authoritarian leftism rather than classical liberalism. And I highly encourage you to explore that in your own life. Great people to follow on that would be people like Dave Rubin, who went famous for saying why I left the left. I have lots of great resources for you on that topic, and he's very famous for saying right now, you don't have to be a Republican, but you can't be a Democrat if you're a classical liberal. So think about that a bit more intensely in your own life. And on the regressive gender norm side of things, with this very small minority of people saying women shouldn't have voting rights, I see that too on social media. The exact same way that you think I said all leftists or all Democrat Party voters or all liberals in America are these crazy authoritarians. That's a very, very, very small percentage of crazy people, largely on Twitter, which is where dreams go to die. Don't waste your time on Twitter. I genuinely believe this. And I fight those people just as they hate me more than they hate you, believe it or not. Those same people threaten to rape me and stuff all the time because I am a woman with a voice in this movement, and they don't think women should have a voice. That's like less than 0.1% of the people that I typically work with in the social media space. It just so happens that algorithms unfortunately amplify those voices, and I hope that the work that I'm doing will allow cooler heads to prevail on that side of things. So I encourage you to do a little bit more research there. On the week cutoff side of things, I'm curious for you, at what point do you think a fetus, quote unquote, has value, a child has value?
So the issue is there's like the downstream, like how do we define like a policy, and there's like the reality. So the issue is
just personally, not policy.
Personally, it has increasingly more value as it approaches the point where it has consciousness. But in terms of where I would be comfortable establishing a allowance for abortion would be approximately 15, 16 weeks. From my view, that's before there's synaptic connections, to my knowledge, before there's, you made the claim that there's pain sensory going on at 12 weeks. I haven't seen anything to substantiate that, but I would be interested to look. So I would say approximately 15, 16 weeks.
Great, my phone's dead. Look this up for sure. 12 weeks is generally when a child can start feeling pain in the womb. It's when your sensory system is fully
How is
developed.
that possible when there's no connection between sensory cortex and like
Who taught you that there's no connection between the sensory
Nobody
cortex?
taught me per se. I simply looked and I looked at studies I could find. There's a trillion studies, like you could keep reading forever. That's just my understanding what the lay of the land is.
Yeah, so generally speaking, the biological consensus is that your nervous system is typically formed at around 12 weeks in utero, and that also involves when a child can feel pain and they move freely about in the womb. They have free movement of their limbs. They certainly have some level of sensory connection with their body, but also are experiencing emotions and they're experiencing a sense of taste, all kinds of stuff. Amazingly, as our technology gets better, our understanding of this gets a whole lot better too, right? If you look at an ultrasound from 30 years ago, a very fuzzy picture on a two-dimensional screen, now today can be parsed out to be a 3D MRI video of a child moving around in the womb, which is crazy that we know that. There's an entire new field of surgery that's literally in utero surgery. So if we know a child has a hole in their heart or spina bifida or some sort of physical abnormality that would make delivery of that child difficult, instead of pursuing abortion, there are entire fields of surgeons in this country who are cutting open the mother's womb, operating on the baby in utero while it's still developing and attached to the umbilical cord, sewing it all back up, and then allowing that child to be delivered at full term. And I love that because it's showing just how little we actually know and how our technology is getting better and we're understanding a whole lot more. I guess my question for you, you're a physicist, so you like to think more in a bit of abstract thought.
I would
Okay,
like to think, yeah.
so let's bring it a little bit more down to earth. I'm a biologist, not a physicist, and physics was not my favorite class, but would you say that if we found a single-celled organism on Mars tomorrow, that we should protect that organism that's considered life?
Yes, but not because of its intrinsic value as life. So if I found like a cheeseburger in a black hole, that would be crazy. Because we would have to call up Isaac Newton, we have to call up Einstein and be like, your theory is like, it's messed up. Because that's something we didn't expect. If we found some life on Mars, it would probably implicate things about life that we didn't know. But in terms of its intrinsic value as life itself, I don't think it would have value. So it would have scientific value, but moral value, I don't think.
Do you think a tree is life worthy of protection? It has value to
some
society.
extent. It has more than zero, I would say.
More than zero. Okay. Do you think a fish in the ocean is life?
More than a tree. The more and more consciousness that you imbue in the life form, I think there would be more value.
How about a puppy?
Yeah, it would be more than a fish in a tree.
But a child in the womb who develops a beating heart at around 5 to 7 weeks in utero, who can feel pain at 12 weeks in utero, who can move about freely with their limbs, that's not a conscious life worthy of our protection?
If it's true that it can feel pain, so we may have just a practical disagreement on the technicality when it can feel pain. If that's the case, I would agree that would have more life. But for example, if we're talking about like an embryo that's been fertilized, conceived like a minute before, definitely in my view, that wouldn't be worthy of the connotation of a child. Although it would represent unique human DNA for sure, but it has pretty much none of the characteristics that we would attribute to an individual, and like literally none. Right?
Even though its entire genetic makeup for everything that it will ever develop into is present at the moment of conception, a genetic individual that has never existed before, will never exist again, from the moment of conception, in which 96% of PhD level biologists in this country alone affirm is a genetically unique human being.
Yes, it's genetically unique, but for example, if you take an identical twin, that's somebody with a genetic copy. That doesn't like devalue them simply because their genetic code exists. I'm more concerned about the experience that an individual may have and like attributing personhood to an entity.
Okay.
Genetic value, unique genetic value, I think that is fairly important, but if everybody in the whole world had the same genetic code, I think the value we would have would still be based off of the conscious experience.
So to play a bit of a hypothetical game here, let's say somebody has a neurological disorder as a grown adult. They're sitting in this room, or they're living their life in a hospital bed, and they can't feel pain. As a living, breathing adult, exactly your age, right in front of your life. Because they can't feel pain, and because their sensory experience is different from yours, but they have a beating heart, they have a unique genetic code, they have limbs that they're freely moving about on their own, do they have less intrinsic value in society than you do?
No, I wouldn't say that. So pain is just a proxy for the whole conscious experience. If they didn't have like a meta-awareness that they exist, if they didn't feel things, or they couldn't interact, if they couldn't like self-alter their actions, then I would say yes. But if it's just everything else is there and they have no pain sensory, then their value would be the same in my
How about somebody in a coma?
In a coma? So in the coma, their conscious will existed beforehand, and presumably they would have some desire as to what they would want to be done with their comatose state. If the person was never going to wake up from a coma, you knew this definitively, which you never would know, then I would say, yeah, that person's as good as dead. And at that point, the only thing that would matter would be people's connections, like maybe their family's connections to that would have some value. Mm-hmm. But intrinsically, their comatose state, if we knew it definitively, it would never exist. I think it's close to a corpse at that point.
Interesting.
Unfortunately.
This exercise I'm going through with you is important, and I wish we could keep doing it all night long. Unfortunately, we have a lot more questions, but I think it's important because you can start asking yourself these questions to pull at the thread of what is considered personhood. What is considered a human life that is worthy of our respect, of dignity, and of legal protection in our society? We all have different answers for that, presumably, because I think somebody in a coma has just as much intrinsic value as I do. I think somebody that experiences life in a different sensory perception than I do has the exact same value that I do. Throughout history, we've had to ask this question: does your skin color determine your level of intrinsic value in society? I think somebody with a different skin color than me has the same intrinsic value that I do. I think someone with a disability who maybe can't walk on their own 2 feet, or who think about the world differently because of a chromosomal abnormality, those are still people worthy of the exact same intrinsic value that I have in society. And when you start pulling at this thread, you realize just how effective the abortion industry has been in dehumanizing children in the womb. Because as our technology has gotten better, and as our understanding of science has gotten better, our understanding of personhood has gotten a whole lot better as well. When Roe v. Wade was instituted in the 1970s as a Supreme Court case, decided by all men, by the way, just in case you needed that little trivia piece, they were talking about abortion being acceptable before or after what they considered to be the age of viability, the week of viability, when a child could reasonably exist outside of the womb if they were delivered. At that time, the age of viability was well into the end of the second trimester of pregnancy. Today in America, children are being born at 19, 20 weeks of pregnancy, and they are surviving because of increased medical awareness, intervention, technology, etc. And those projections are only expected to get better. We have in utero surgery where we can operate on children at 6, 7 weeks in utero. Like, how crazy is that we're being able to do that today? Because of that, I think we're starting to wake up as a society and realize there is no magic line that I can draw at 3 weeks, at 5 weeks, at 12 weeks, at 15 weeks, in a comatose state, when someone's old, when someone has a life-threatening terminal diagnosis, if someone has a disability, if somebody has a different skin color, if somebody has a different gender. Where do I draw the line where life is considered worthy of our protection? And scientifically, to think about this from my perception, there is no place to draw a line other than the moment that human being comes into existence. Because as soon as you start drawing the line somewhere else, you're playing eugenics. And it's the exact same line of thinking that got us into slavery. It's the exact same line of thinking that got us into the Holocaust. It's the exact same line of thinking that is allowing our society to perpetrate disgusting, gross human rights abuses all over the world. Because we think we know better. We think we know who is a real person or not. And I think that's important for us to start pulling at these strings, because I, for one, am pro-life, what we call from womb to tomb. I'm 100% pro-life all the time. Right here in the state, about an hour and a half away, my grandmother is in a coma and she's dying right now. She's projected to pass away any moment now, actually. And I think about my grandmother in her 90s and what she's experiencing in her life, and how people would view her differently or with less value because she's halfway out the door, or as good as dead, to borrow your words. Think about how we apply that same thought process to children. Well, they don't really think for themselves. How could we know that? How could we possibly know that? We don't know that. And our technology is getting better to suggest that we actually were wrong about that. Well, they don't really feel pain. Well, actually, our technology is getting better to suggest that we were wrong about that. Well, they don't really have a beating heart. Okay, but we have so much protection and value for plant life, or for single-celled organisms, or all kinds of stuff in our natural world that we do say is life worthy of protection. So because a beating heart has yet to develop, we're saying that that's not a human being. It's a really dangerous game to start playing, because when we start to draw those lines, of which we all have different definitions, and that I'm uncomfortable with in and of itself, because as a scientist, there is a difference between yes and no. There's a difference between right and wrong. There's a difference between true and false. There is no middle ground. There is no gray area. There has to be an answer to when does life begin The scientific community is in complete concurrence about this, that life begins at conception. That might make us uncomfortable, that might be inconvenient to us at times, but inconvenience has been a very, very significant excuse throughout all of human history to dehumanize entire groups of people. So I encourage you to keep thinking about that, think critically about it, do a whole lot more research about child development in utero, and particularly sensory development, and I'm so excited to see more research that we do about that in the scientific community. Thank you for being here, I really appreciate it. And it takes guts to talk to somebody that you disagree with, so thank you.